Hey everyone, this is Christopher Luxon, the former CEO of Air New Zealand.
This is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire.
This is Tracy Ibarra. I'm in Executive Solutions at Dell Technologies.
This is Travis Chappell, founder of Build Your Network. If you are wanting to learn how to embrace change,
To navigate through disruption as a leader,
then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast.
The Leadership is Changing podcast.
the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend,
my very good friend, Denis Giannoutsos.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsos.
Hey, welcome to the show, Leadership is Changing. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Leaders everywhere confront similar obstacles because people are people, but everywhere you go, leaders are overwhelmed, disrupted, and under pressure. They run from email to email, meeting to meeting. Many leaders are not changing quick enough, which means they run the risk of becoming irrelevant and being left behind. The purpose of the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. I believe we don't have enough effective leaders in the world today, and if we can get the leaders to step up and lead change, then they can inspire real change. Hey listeners, it's now time to adapt in our fast-moving world, and I want to welcome you to today's Ask Denis episode. Hey listeners, if you haven't already checked out the Facebook group or the LinkedIn page of Leadership is Changing, there are two different communities we have there, depending on what platform you're on. And we would love to see you come and join those communities as we talk about leadership is changing and that kind of topic and others various topics as well. So once again, welcome to the Ask Denis episode, which is a freestyle episode. And I'm asked a question by our listeners, and I share my thoughts, insights, and experiences from working with many leaders around the globe. Alrighty, so today we have a question that's come through from one of our listeners, but it's based on a Facebook Live, a LinkedIn and YouTube Lives that I did this week. And the topic was around listen to your team. I've said that leaders need to listen to their teams, need to listen to what they're saying, but also listen to what they're not saying. I talk about how leaders actually need to be present and listening to what people are saying and being present with them. Sometimes people just want 5 minutes of your time just to let things off their chest and get the steam out there, off their shoulders, not to leave it with you, so then it's put on your shoulders, but sometimes they just need to air some things out, get some guidance, maybe get some thoughts from you, so then they can move on indeed. But sometimes leaders get asked questions, and this sometimes can happen in presentations, town halls, when they're in front of the media and so forth, or even in front of the employees. Now, when they're in front of the employees and they get asked the question, sometimes they don't know the answer. But sometimes, well, majority of the times they do know the answer and they'll give that answer to the audience. But when they don't know the answer, sometimes some leaders will start to make up the answer right there and then on the spot. And they come across as being not confident, weak. They come across as being out of sorts, not sure what they're saying. And people aren't dumb. People understand when a leader's like that and understand and can see through whether that leader is being transparent, authentic, or even being honest with them at times. Now, there are some leaders that will actually step back and go and throw their arms up or their hands up and go, you know what? I don't know the answer to that question. It's a great question, and I'm going to come back to you. But many times, leaders don't go back to their people, don't go back to their employees, don't go back to the person asking the question. And what actually happens there is that credibility, trust, everything goes out the window pretty quickly. So the question that I got from a lady called Jarena, who's actually one of our listeners of the podcast, her question was, based on what we talked about and what I covered off in that Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube Live video this week, how can one rely on leaders who don't follow up? That's a very, very cool question. And, you know, if we don't go back to them like we said they would, or like we said we would, then how can they rely on us as leaders? So it's a great question. Yes, trust, credibility will be lost very quickly. You know what? It's hard to build trust and credibility. It takes time, takes many actions, takes a lot of things for it to be built over time. But it can be lost very quickly. It can be lost within that one presentation, that one question. It can be lost in some of the actions or inactions of some leaders for sure. And so I want to today talk to both the leaders and also the individuals, the employees. I want to talk to both sides, and I want to talk to you all in general. The one thing I would say to leaders is please don't make things up on the spot. If you don't know the answer, then acknowledge the question to say, hey, that's a great question. Thank you very much. Or that's a good question, or it's an interesting question. And if it's not a great question, then don't say it's a great question. Just say, hey, thank you for your question. I don't actually know the answer to that right now. Now, there could be many reasons why we don't know the answer. One is if we're going through a change process, maybe we don't actually know what the structure looks like. If it's a strategy thing, well, there's all sorts of different topics we can talk about, team. But if you don't know the answer to the question, then actually acknowledge it, saying that's a great question, or thank you for that question. I don't know the answer to it, but I am going to come back to you. Now, the promise here is promise them that you are going to go back, but also when you're going to go back. Now, for some of you may not be able to give a date because there's still some things up in the air or some things that's still being worked on we don't actually know. Well, then give them a range or when you're expecting to come back to them. Then what I'd like you to do, and what I highly recommend that you do, is that you actually follow up with the audience. Go back to the person who actually asked the question in particular. Number 2 is go back to the wider audience as well. Now, sometimes you can do that in FAQs, as they call them, frequently asked questions, and actually able to put that question in there. Maybe you go back with another newsletter or an announcement and also say, hey, at this event, a question was asked by somebody and here's the answer to that question. Or the next time you run a town hall, bring that question up again and say, this was actually asked and here's our answer, or the way that we want to look at things. Team, don't lose credibility and trust. Be authentic leaders. Make sure you're actually giving those answers to people. Now, let's go to the other side. Let's talk about the employees or the individuals. This is what I'm going to say to you, team. And this also goes to leaders as well, because you see, they're part of a bigger team and they may have a leader as well. So this is them. I'm talking to them now as individuals too. Don't let the leaders get away with A, making it up, and B, not coming back to you to answer your questions. Do not let them get away. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for a lot of people, they might find it difficult to go back to those leaders. For some people, they may feel a little bit vulnerable. Well, what I'm going to highly recommend is that you don't always have to go back yourself. You could actually, as a group, go back to your leader to get them to go and ask the bigger leader or more senior leader to actually come back and what's the answer on those questions. But team, keep asking the questions. Make sure your questions are a relevant question and a quality question. For a lot of people, when we go to the audience and asking questions, they grab the microphone and then they hang on to the microphone for a few minutes. And all they're doing is they're rambling on, or they're making a statement, but they don't actually have a question. So I always want to ask that person, thanks for sharing, but what is your actual question? To get them to be very clear on what the question is. So keep asking the questions. And team, hold the leaders accountable. Leaders need to be accountable, and they should be accountable. And so hold them accountable by asking those same questions over and over again. What I'm about to share with you goes to everybody who's listening to this podcast. People are looking for leaders with vision. They have a big vision for the organization, for the team. They know where they're going. They look to leaders for guidance. They want to get your guidance based on your experiences, based on you knowing a bigger picture and getting you to help them out. They want to know that you understand the strategy and helping them bring it to life so they understand it as well. They're looking for leaders for growth. They don't really want to work for an organization that's downsizing, but at times that happens, team. And sometimes those organizations do need to downsize for various reasons. But isn't it more fun to work for an organization that's growing? Isn't it more fun to work with an organization that's out there making it happen and doing really well. And the last thing I would say is that people are looking to leaders for strength. They want the leader to be their rock, for support. And as we went through the pandemic lockdowns, and as we still are going through that right now, people are looking to their leaders for strength. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for what is our strategy as a business going forward? How are we going to grow as a business going forward? And what is your vision, leader? What are you going to do? Where are we going to go? And a lot of it is people saying to each other, where are they going to take us? But, we've got to remember that they are all of us. We are all in this together as a team and as an organization. So people are looking to leaders for vision, guidance, strategy, growth, strength / being a rock. Now, here's my next thing to all leaders. Step up as a leader. Do what you need to do as a leader and show up every day as a leader that you want to be, a leader that you should be, a leader that your organization wants you to be and deserves to have as a leader going forward. Be accountable. If you're going to commit to something, then deliver it. Keep going, but be accountable to it. Own it. Whatever you're going to say, ownership is one thing, but actually owning it and running with it is really quite key. And the buck stops with you. So it's with you. You own it. The next thing would be hold yourself, your peers, and your leadership accountable. So if your peers are demonstrating certain behaviors or they're not actually delivering what they're going to commit to doing or they're promising to do, hold them accountable. Hold yourself around that stuff as well, but also your leadership. Hold each other accountable, which is going to be really quite interesting. But this is another thing, and this is the last point I want to make, and it's got 4 different areas in here. Be real. And if I can take the word real, R-E-A-L, what do I mean? The R, be real, realistic. Be a human, be something that's real and someone who gets it. The E, be the example, the role model, walk the talk. The A stands for authentic, being authentic, transparent, being who you need to be. Many employees today are wanting leaders to be authentic. Many citizens of countries are wanting their leaders to be authentic. And the L stands for lead. Lead from the front. Don't wait for anyone else. Don't turn around and look for who else is doing it. Go ahead and lead from the front. Be that example. So, once again, be real. So leaders, step up as a leader, be accountable, own it, hold yourself, your peers, and your leadership accountable, and be real. Real, realistic, an example, a role model, walking the talk, authentic, and leading from the front. Just know that if we all can do that, that's how we can hold the trust and the credibility of the organization. If we do what we say we're going to do, then they're going to hang on to that trust and that credibility. It's easy to lose, but it takes a long time to build it. And as you build it, making sure that you're building foundations for the future is a real interesting and important thing for you to do. Hey, listeners, if you haven't already checked out the Facebook group or the LinkedIn page, Leadership is Changing, love to see you there. Come along and join those 2 different communities or on those different platforms. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Change is incredibly scary, especially with the unknown and the unfamiliar territory. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing. Look out for the episodes as they're being released. Download them. Have a listen. Put a review and a rating. Share them with your family, your friends, your network. If there's any feedback you'd like to give me about the show, or if there's any questions you have for me to ask my guests as I interview them, or if you have a question for the Ask Denis episode, which is a freestyle episode, then feel free to send me an email, dennis@leadingchangepartners.com. Hey, listeners, always great to be with you. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.